You're tuned into the hottest paranormal life show on YouTube, Into the Fringe, where we discuss lost civilizations, UFOs, cryptids, unsolved mysteries, megalithic structures, extraterrestrials, interdimensional portals, time skips, and more. Don't change that channel, because now you are leaving the mainstream and entering into the fringe.
Welcome followers. It is I, Cardinal Sin, and I would like to welcome you to Into the Fringe, number 49, our first of two abduction roundtables. And our guests tonight are Denise Stoner and Kathleen Martin. Denise Stoner is proud to be a part of the MUFON Experiencer Resource Team. She also holds the following positions: Florida MUFON Field Investigator, Star Team Member, SSD, and she is also Assistant State Director of Florida MUFON. She co-authored and published her first book, The Alien Abduction Files, with Kathleen Martin. Denise has an educational background in business and psychology and is a certified hypnotist specializing in regressive hypnosis. She began her research in hypnosis under Dr. Bob Romack in Denver, Colorado. They worked together for 5 years on pain control, smoking cessation, and past life regression research. Denise worked for 8+ years in the Denver, Colorado area at Department of the Interior National Park Service for the Saudi Arabia team. Their task was to do planning, design, and construction for the very first national park in Saudi Arabia. It is called the Asir. The team of 4 won an award from the Park Service from their work. Her retirement from the federal government after spending 12 hours with the U.S. Navy doing background investigations for new recruits wanting to enter the nuclear power school has allowed her to expand her work with UFO research and investigation. Denise has appeared on TV to include the Travel Channel, PBS Weird Florida with Charlie Carlson, and has been a guest on many radio shows. Denise is currently moving forward with some exciting new projects, including her work she is doing in the field of past lives, involving possible abductions, along with paranormal experiences and how they might all connect in past to present history. Denise facilitates private workshops for experiencers in the Orlando, Florida area, along with MUFON meetings for the public. Her involvement in the UFO field spans more than 40 years. Her hypnosis certification was earned through hypnosis and regression training at the Hypnotic Research Society by Dr. Ronald P. DeVasto, and advanced forensic regression study through the National Guild of Hypnotists by Donald J. Martin. Kathleen Marden is an author, on-camera expert, international conference presenter, experiencer advocate, and hypnosis practitioner. Since 1990, she has researched the perplexing nature of UFOs and the non-human entities associated with highly advanced aerial vehicles via her own groundbreaking research, investigation, and experimentation. Her research has extended to archival collections and the U.S. government's involvement in the investigation of UFOs and its major studies. This has combined to give her a depth of knowledge that few possess. She is the 2021 recipient of the International UFO Congress Lifetime Achievement Award. For 30 years, she engaged in groundbreaking, scientifically focused research on ET experiencers and the history of government involvement in the major UFO studies and government cover-up. During this time, she was closely associated with the Mutual UFO Network as its director of the Experiencer Research Team and the Edgar Mitchell Foundation for research into extraterrestrial and extraordinary encounters as a research consultant and advisory board member. Her interest in UFOs and contact began in 1961 when her aunt and uncle, Betty and Barney Hill, had a close encounter and subsequent abduction in New Hampshire's White Mountains. She has conducted an extensive multi-year investigation of their experiences. The 60th anniversary edition of her book, Captured, the Benny and Barney Hill Experience, is available now. Her 5 books are available in all formats at fine online bookstores everywhere. Autographed copies can be purchased in the USA at www.kathleen-marden.com. Welcome to Into the Fringe, Denise Stoner, and welcome back to Into the Fringe, Kathleen Marden.
Thank you. Nice to be with you again.
And nice to be here.
To see you. That was a mouthful. And I wanted to make sure that everyone knows that tonight's giveaway is going to be an autographed copy of Denise and Kathleen's book, The Alien Abduction Files, which I have had time to read, and it is a really fantastic book. Congratulations to the both of you on this landmark book. It is absolutely a very important and riveting book, The Alien Abduction Files. I realize you've both written other important books, but since we only have 2 hours tonight, I thought we'd concentrate on that book. And while I have questions for both of you, since you're co-authors on this book, please feel free to jump in anywhere. Into the Fringe is more of a casual conversation than a formal interview. Before we get started, I just wanted to acknowledge some of the folks that are here in the chat. And Canadian Spider-Man is here. Derek McManus is here. Ari Bavel, my brother, is here. Darius Munchausen is here. Hello. Ivan Ivanovich is here. Greetings. Tommy Hawksblood is here. Greetings. Antiderivative Jill is here. Hello. And for right now, that's all that I can see. So let's go ahead and jump right in, ladies. Denise, could you talk about your missing time when crossing the Glacier Valley in the high mountains of Colorado?
Yes, I can. And some of that I remembered consciously, and some I had help with Kathy through some hypnosis. It kind of tied everything together for me. We lived in Denver, and oh gosh, about at least every other weekend we went up to the high mountains to a campsite that we had just outside a town called Buena Vista. And we stopped on a pass every time we went just to stretch before we made the last hour or so into Buena Vista. So we stopped, and when we got out of the car and stretched and looked, I could see down over the valley that there were lights coming across the desert, and there was nothing there that should cause those lights to be out there. I couldn't tell if they were floating or down on the desert floor, what they were doing. So we got back in the car, and I kept my eye on the lights. They were kind of fascinating. And after just a short time, I noticed they were coming toward our car. My husband and my daughter was in the back seat sleeping. And pretty soon they were over the top of the car. And I looked up, and I saw what looked like a dark figure, something they might have been attached to. I wasn't sure, but before I had a chance to do anything more, talked to my husband, who did not respond to me. His hands were kind of tight knuckling, or white knuckling, the steering wheel. He was staring straight ahead. He did not look back at me, and pretty soon the car started to move off the road and lift off the road. And the car was carried across the desert and finally settled down, and this all I remembered. And then those lights came over the top of the car, across the front of the hood, and settled down in the desert. And before I could figure out what it was, we found ourselves on the other side of the Glacier Valley in an area called Trout Creek Pass. It was dark, and we had planned to arrive in daylight, as we always did. But now it's dark, the headlights are on, the engine is running. We're sitting still on the road. My husband is again white knuckling. Finally, I see him focusing. I asked him what he thought had happened. He didn't know. Since I'm a longtime abductee, I said, "Do you think we were abducted? Was that a UFO?" He didn't know. He was really shook up, and so was I, that they could lift the car like that and take us, and now we don't have a memory of what happened. He had set the odometer. There was no change in it when there should have been, something like 74 miles on it. And there was nothing. So we decided we'd better go on into the camp and proceeded ahead. And when we got to the campground, the camp area, my parents and a family friend were walking down the road towards the ranch home, and they were going to ask to borrow the phone because in 1982 there were no cell phones that we would have carried.
That's right.
And just as they were about to reach the door, the entrance to the ranch was right there also, and they saw headlights stop just a moment, and it was our car coming in. So my mom wanted to know what was going on, always had to know, and we had no idea. We just had to say we did not know. My dad worked for aerospace, and he was used to keeping secrets and confidentiality, and so he just said, okay, something like, we'll talk about this later, or let's just go in and get dinner, and that's what we did.
So there was a craft involved. When did you realize it was not just another vehicle on the road?
I think that I knew, but I didn't want to voice it, but then I wasn't sure. I couldn't put a complete shape to it, and so Kathy did some hypnosis work, and we put that together. So if she would like to talk about that, she can. She does a really good job of helping me because some of this I forget. Once the hypnosis happens, then I don't remember. I kind of set it back somewhere in the recesses. So she fills me in from time to time on exactly what I said.
Fair enough. So, Kathleen, I will ask you, when did you first meet Denise, and how did you meet, and what attracted you to her case?
I first met Denise when I moved to Florida, and we moved here in 2009. And I decided that I wanted to attend a MUFON meeting. She was a state section director and was holding a meeting. And so I went. I didn't announce to her or anyone else, but she recognized me. And I think that it was either at that meeting or the one after that she invited me to have lunch with her at her home. So I accepted. I went to her home, and I didn't know her at all at that point. But over lunch, she told me that she had been abducted. Now, she didn't tell me she was a lifelong experiencer. She told me about this one time that she had been abducted. And she didn't know the date. She didn't know what year it was. She only knew that she and her husband went to their summer camp on weekends and it was located at the Grace Acre Ranch in Buena Vista. And so I was interested because there were witnesses. Of course, I had to question, well, did they just run off the road? Were they unconscious for a while? Was there some other plausible explanation for what had occurred. And so after speaking with Denise for a lengthy period of time, I asked her for permission to investigate her case. And then also, I wanted to hypnotize Denise and her husband separately. I knew in this investigation, they lost 40 miles. It was 7 o'clock and light outside when this craft picked them up off the road. It was, I believe, 11 o'clock and cold and dark when they found themselves at the top of Trout Creek Pass. Excuse me.
Say that 5 times with marbles in your mouth.
Right. And so, it was intriguing to me because Betty and Barney Hill were my aunt and uncle. And I was always looking for cases that involved more than one person, people who were credible. Denise had a credible profession. Denise's father did. In fact, Denise's husband did. Ed had been in the military. He did everything military style. He had a notebook that he kept information in. He checked the mileage when he arrived at the top of Trout Creek. I mean, I keep doing this. At the top of Kenosha Pass, 10,000-foot pass. They always stopped and had a snack there before they descended to the desert floor. And so everything was done very methodically, according to Ed, in his style of doing things. And he knew what the mileage was. He knew the time frame. He had a great deal of information recorded. So this made it a lot easier to do this investigation, because this happened in 1982, we discovered. And I was investigating this in about 2010, 2011. So I was very intrigued by this. I realized that Denise was a top-notch investigator herself, that she had a great deal of information. She had all kinds of gadgets that she used in her investigations. In fact, I went on investigations with her, and I was very, very impressed. She was the best investigator that I have ever seen, in fact. So that really counted in my book. And she's intelligent and articulate and educated and had credible jobs working for the National Park Service, for the military. Ed's father was a medical doctor, prominent in this area of Florida where we live. So I did go to Colorado. I did follow that route. I measured it. I looked everywhere, what they saw, where they saw it, where they ended up. And so that was part of my investigation.
And then, was this an investigation for the Mutual UFO Network?
No, it was not. It was a private investigation.
Okay.
That I did. And so I asked if I could hypnotize Denise and Ed separately, and still amnesia, just like Dr. Benjamin Simon did in the Betty and Barney Hill case, so that they couldn't share this information. And I did that, starting with Denise. I recorded her statements under hypnosis. I used the forensic hypnosis method so that I would not lead her in any way. She's a very, very good hypnotic subject. She's been hypnotized many, many times when she worked with Dr. Romack. And so I was very pleased to work with her. And under hypnosis, I discovered that she and Ed's were picked up in their vehicle and carried across the desert floor. Their car was put down, and they were taken from that vehicle to a beam of light, blue light. Denise, as she looked into this light, said that it reminded her of frog eggs in frog jelly, in a pond. That's what it reminded her of. She saw this, but she also saw 3 orbs inside that light. And we know that those orbs contain ET consciousness. So as they come down, when they come into our dimension, they sort of pop into these gray entities. And Denise's escort, who she recognized, who she trusted.
And when you say escort, you mean her aboard craft escort?
Yes, her personal gray escort. Took her, she was absorbed into this. She was taken up into the craft. When she arrived there, there was a dimly lit hallway. There were what she called soldiers lining the wall. They were the smaller grays, and those grays generally act as assistants. They sometimes also procure the humans. They take them onto the craft. And so they only move when they're told to do so. Denise was taken down the hallway by her escort, and she arrived at the room that she was going to be taken into. And when she entered that room, she was not at all happy. She became very frightened. And so that always requires calming suggestions, that it's in the past, it will remain in the past, it won't hurt you now, there's no need to be fearful, that sort of thing.
And that sort of thing just reduces fear. It doesn't obviate it, right?
It does. It reduces the level of fear. It can. I even use a protective shell that people put around themselves to protect them from these entities or those memories. It depends upon the individual. This entity that Denise observed was a mantis type, sort of striated colors in its skin, probably had an exoskeleton. The colors were kind of beige, tan, and off-white. He had a neck or a head that turned sort of like an owl's head, not like a humanoid's head, but he was humanoid in a sense. He had in his exoskeleton extraordinarily thin coating, almost like bone, very large joints, and very large hands, which were pretty clumsy with the instruments that he was using. They had to have large holders in attachments so that he could hold on to them with his little kind of pinchers in a way. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And he was the doctor, and her escort was the educator. And the doctor, inserted first what was probably a new implant into Denise's foot and up her leg. Those implants have intelligence, so they can move to the part of the body that they are programmed to move to. In fact, in another event that Denise had, an abduction event later, there was another implant placed under her skin, and she came to my house, and we actually I was able to palpate it. She was able to watch it as it traveled up her arm and finally it disappeared. So she had thought about having an x-ray, but she didn't get there in time. So to get back to what happened to Denise on the craft, after that, they unzipped the zipper on her jeans and placed a needle into her navel. It was attached to a tube that was attached to the wall, and they extracted something. We know that that's probably ova that they were extracting from Denise. And when she was finished doing that, they decided that they would take her on a tour of the craft. They took her to what to Denise seemed like the central core of this craft. She was taken into a room. And Denise, you described that so well. Would you like to describe that room and what happened?
Sure.
And also, if I may, in addition, could you tell us what the entities looked like?
Yeah, the gray looked like your typical gray, except, a little taller than those short robotic ones, with the great big black almond-shaped eyes, tiny, tiny little slit for a mouth, not a really noticeable nose, and I really didn't pay attention to the ears, and I should. I think there were just tiny little holes, but nothing protruding from the head. And that was the individual that took me on this tour. We reached a room to my right, and as we stepped in, I could feel it felt like a heartbeat. The whole room felt like a heartbeat. So the first thing I did was look down and see that there were pathways, structured pathways, and there was a red liquid flowing rapidly underneath those walkways. And I looked up, and when I did, I saw tubing, piping, connections like you would have on the back of your dryer that looked like accordion, but made of something way different. I don't know exactly what it was, but attached to something at the back of the room. And I realized I had a strong emotion about the whole thing because I saw a face, the face of a living being in the structure at the back of the room. There was some greenery, a little bit. I don't know if it was like a moss or what. I didn't recognize it as something I've seen here. I saw metal. I saw the fluid. I saw the face. And this person, female, could speak telepathically. And she said to me, I was feeling sorry for her, like, what in the world? Were you captured and locked in here? Is this a prison? And I heard her voice say, do you think that that is the right answer? It isn't, because I volunteered for this. And do you think I'm stuck here all the time? Because I'm not. I can leave. I can take a break. I can travel. I'm in communication with others like me. We all know where the other is, and when we are called to meet as one, we join an enormous mothership. And all of a sudden, a picture flashed in my mind of what that was and the immense size of this thing that she belonged to. And then I started to feel ill, like I had to get out of there. Emotion was still running strong. And so I left. And I felt again like there was a heart beating all around me. And this showed well and clear again under hypnosis, where when Kathy was observing, what did you say it looked like or appeared?
It looked like a force field. I used to compare it to someone standing and throwing bean bags at you, and your limbs were moving out as if you were being hit by something. And so we got you out of that room pretty quickly.
Yeah, so she did. But then I just wasn't happy with the full results because I didn't remember any of that while it was going on. So I asked to be hypnotized again and to allow me to run through the whole process, observing. And so we did that. And it was, did we record that? We did, didn't we?
We record everything, yes.
Yes, was recorded so that we would have it. And I still can see the face of that woman. I can still see the room and the sensation I had when I walked in. It was just something that is difficult for anyone to understand. That
Sure.
this complicated biological entity, also mechanical, organic, all of the above, was there in this room operating that ship.
And I understand they inserted something into your foot and up your leg.
Yeah.
Can you tell us about what it was and what it was made of and what your knowledge about that is now since that happened?
Well, it felt like metal. It felt like a wire, but it had a little bit of a vibration or a buzz to it, and it went in rapidly but very painful. And years later, I had this little eruption between my big toe and the one next to it. In the morning, I woke up with it. I reached down and touched it, and I felt the sharp point. And I remembered, and I wondered, was this the wire that had been inserted years ago? So I did go to the doctor, and he said he had no idea what that was, had never seen anything like it, and he was leery about pulling that. It was
And
sticking
this was
out.
on an X-ray?
No, it was not on an X-ray, because after he did that, he said, "We'll take it out, but let's get you on some antibiotics." So he put me on some antibiotics, and
So
within a
did he palpate it to find it?
yes.
Okay.
Well, it was sticking out from this little swelling
Oh, okay.
area. So yes, he
He
felt it.
didn't need an X-ray.
No, you could see it. This little point sticking out. So I took the antibiotics, intending in a week to go back and have him remove it, and it just crumbled. It just crumbled. The swelling went down, and it was gone.
Interesting. I'm almost. It sounds so terrifying. I'm almost at a loss for words, and most people that know me well will tell you that hardly ever happens.
You know, it is terrifying when you are being taken. But generally, by the time you arrive on the craft, you're calm, very calm.
Yeah, that's true. And the gray would touch my forehead from time to time, and that would settle me right down. It just felt okay. The doctor, that insect-like mantis entity, he was all business. So that when I yelled at him for doing what he was doing, he moved right in close to my face so I could see this mandible moving. I could see he blinked this way instead of this way like we do, and was looking at me like, "What are you yelling for? What is that noise coming out of you for?" The only curiosity or emotion that I saw out of him.
And I presume you answered.
I just said, "I don't like it." And stop. I just said, "Stop, stop." And so then my forehead was touched. Everything was fine. They completed what they were doing. And that was that for that particular time.
When you were taken, what was running the craft? What was so different from the operating system of other types of craft?
This one was run by something living. It was absolutely something living. It was female. It had volunteered for that job, but it was mixed up with all this organic and biological material. It was all a part of the whole. And the fluid that kept it running under the floor, and the actual feeling of a heartbeat, that was so different from other crafts I've been on. It did not have that. It had your panel, your entities operating it just like a pilot would. So there's a big difference between the two types of crafts that I saw.
And Kathleen, you hypnotized Denise and her husband. Can you tell us about the hypnosis and whether they shared the same experience under hypnosis?
Denise's husband was taken to craft the same way. He was taken to a room that was dimly lit. There was a domed ceiling. He was lying on a slab. He was cold, and he was just waiting and waiting. And he wanted to know. He was just wondering, where is Denise? What's going on? And he then said to me, I don't want to go any further. If they did anything to me, I don't want to know. And of course, I would not force anyone to go beyond what they didn't want to do. And so I said, would you like me to move ahead to the time when you were out of the craft and no longer there? And he said yes. So we moved ahead until he found himself back in his vehicle, and he was there at the top of Trout Creek Pass. It was no longer daylight. It was dark. It was freezing, and the car had the headlights were on, but he had not turned the headlights on. He was sure of that. And the car was stopped, and he said that Denise was freaking out. Those were his words, that she was just freaking out. And so they just started up the vehicle and drove on to the Grace Acre Ranch. Her parents and the family friend they were supposed to meet, they arrived at the same time every time they met there for the weekend. Her mother would always have dinner ready for them. And they were walking up to the ranch house to try to use the phone to call the highway patrol, because they were afraid that Denise and Ed had been in an accident or were broken down somewhere, because they were always prompt. They always arrived on time for dinner.
And of course, no cell phones in 1982.
Yeah, it was more difficult then.
Yeah, that's so true.
And when they did that, what did they find at the house?
You mean when they walked up to the ranch house?
Mm-hmm.
They saw the headlights coming around the corner, and it was our car. And they started to ask, where have you been? What happened? And we just said, we don't know. I think that they could tell we were, just shaken up and looking a little bit confused. And so that's when my dad said, that's okay, that's enough. Let's just go and have dinner and sit by the fire. And at one other point, when I was taken out of our truck here in Florida on a dive trip, Ed, my husband, was able to draw the entity, putting me back in the truck seat, and was able to do that for Kathy.
Kathy, how did you discover the type of craft when you hypnotized Denise?
I just asked her to describe what she saw. Her eye. Well, first I asked, "Are your eyes open?" I always have to make sure the eyes are open, and then describe to me.
Wait. You mean you didn't start out by saying, "Tell me about the aliens. What do they look like?"
Yeah, so that's what I did, and just as we went step by step of everything that occurred as she was reliving it on that craft, and then later, as she said, we went into more detail of that room that she was taken to with the what appeared to be biological material deep within the energy system of this craft, that it had consciousness itself, which was pretty amazing to me.
Yeah.
I was able to interview Denise's mother. She was still alive. Her father was then deceased, as was the family friend. And her mother made a sworn statement that she signed. And we were able to nail down the date. It was Friday, August 13, 1982. No idea before the hypnosis, but we were able to nail that date down. I checked it, and yes, there was a Friday the 13th of August, 1982. So
it turns out Friday the 13th really does give you bad luck.
I don't know. Would you call it bad luck, or I learned something from it, or I was able to compare it with another craft I had been on, and yeah, all of the above.
Kathleen, I'm curious, what made this such a good case that you decided to write about it in the Alien Abduction Files?
it was all put together. It was the evidence, the level of evidence, the character of the individuals involved, their histories. They were highly functioning individuals. They were their economic situation was in line with where it should be, with the types of jobs that they held. It was Denise's credibility as a highly regarded investigator for the Mutual UFO Network. It was that her mother was alive and there was a witness there. I eventually found out that Denise had been taken for the first time when she believes, under 3 years old. And although I did not do the hypnosis, I don't think on that, she had memory of that. Maybe it was somebody else who worked with her, or what was it, Denise? Why did you remember that?
That's a very conscious memory, because I was just 2.5 and I had climbed up on the sofa and was looking out the window. My mom was in the hospital giving birth to my sister, and that has triggered the memory because I was never left alone with anyone else. So there was my grandfather, and I saw what I thought was Humpty Dumpty outside the window. It was a huge egg-shaped craft, and I wanted to know why he didn't have a face. It was just a great big bright yellow egg, and I remembered my grandfather looking, and I can picture the fear on his face even now. He'd been doing the dinner dishes, and he said, "We're going to go to bed." And he went upstairs, gave me a bath, put me to bed, and my wallpaper was all nursery rhyme characters. So I began to look for Humpty Dumpty. Something told me, keep looking, and pretty soon a little character walked out of the wallpaper, like a little hooded monk with bell-shaped sleeves, carrying a long stick with a light on the end. And he came up to my bed. He was just real short, real tiny, and put his other hand out and asked me if I'd go with him. And I did. I just went with him, took his hand. We went out into the hall. He touched the hall wallpaper with that instrument, and we walked right through. Walked right through the wall.
Interesting. We have a question from the chat, who happens to be my brother, but the question is, do you think that the wire in your leg and your foot crumbled because of the antibiotics, or maybe because of exposure to the air?
Oh boy, smart question. Um, I don't think it had anything to do with the antibiotics. I think maybe exposure because it seemed to crumble as it pushed its way out, and it was a long wire.
How
So
long was it?
it pushed all the way up in not into but along my shin bone.
And this was in the front of your leg then.
Uh-huh.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And son of a red shirt in the chat asks if you'd taken antibiotics at any point before that.
No. No,
Very
I had not.
interesting.
Uh-huh.
All right. How do you think, Kathleen, does this case compare and contrast to other UFO abduction cases?
It's pretty typical, particularly in cases where the mantis types, praying mantis types, are working with the gray types. It's pretty typical. It's different than the grays working alone, or other races of grays working together. The equipment is made for those very large hands, sort of clumsy hands that those entities have, those mantis entities. I have a video that one of my cases has been able to capture of these entities. And it's almost like a mitten, the way their hands are.
Yeah.
Do you have this video on your computer?
It is.
I can't show it now.
Okay.
Yeah, she's describing it just exactly the way I saw it. You think, oh, is that like a lobster claw? But not quite. It's different. Yeah, very much so.
And Denise, where were you when you returned to the car?
When I was returned to the car, you mean from the mountain pass?
Mm-hmm.
They came and got me out of the car and took me apparently into the craft. Because
And the car too?
no, not that no, I don't think so. Memory of that is real vague, and it's just recently that I remembered being taken out of the car. I did not recall that before.
When you were returned to the car, it was in the same place?
No, it was all the way across the Glacier Valley to an area called Trout Creek Pass. And so we had crossed, about 4 miles outside a little tiny town called Jefferson, all the way across that valley up onto that pass, and that's where we were sitting in the dark.
So at some point, the vehicle was picked up by that craft.
Yes.
It had to have been picked up. But it appears that Ed and Denise were inside that craft before the car was picked up, according to what each said under hypnosis. And then somehow they were put back into the car, and it was set down on Trout Creek Pass.
That's tough to say. So this was not a situation, as is sometimes reported in other abduction cases, where the people, victims, however you want to call it, suddenly regain consciousness and they're driving, and they realize they have missing time, and they've had quite some distance from the last time they remember.
It is that kind of case.
Yeah,
they were missing 40 miles on their trip odometer.
So is there a way to tell whether they were put back in their car and continued driving, or if the car was removed from the road and taken and placed down 40 miles later?
The car was apparently picked up from the desert floor See, the craft flew. The Denise and Ed's car apparently out quite a distance into the desert floor where no one would see it. It's a mountainous area, but a high desert.
Yes, and it's huge and flat in that valley. Plus, we had set the odometer. My husband had set the odometer, and it hadn't moved the way it should. And it was a new car, and everything had been in working order. And it began to work again as soon as we headed for Buena Vista.
So that's a mystery why they would put the car down and take Ed and Denise out of the car and into the craft, but both of them were taken that way. Ed reported a kind of a whirring sound, a change in the air pressure as well. He was able to detect that.
Yeah, it was the longest time that we were taken, and with the missing time. Other times I've been taken myself, but he's actually removed from the bedroom and put out in our area where we have a computer, and then comes to and realizes he didn't go out there on purpose. Would come in and ask me, "Were you taken, or has something happened?" And yes, it did. Evidence by freezing cold feet, rosy cheeks from a time when I was taken. It was very cold, overlooking an area like Colorado, when in actuality we lived here at the time. The trim of my nightgown was wet. So there's evidence, and there's stuff that's questionable. Even for myself, I have to wonder what is going on and why is it going on. Kathy and I, when we met, we discovered I was born in Connecticut. My dad was born in New Hampshire. So our relatives were all within the same couple of states of each other. And then I brought up the fact, when I had invited her to lunch that day, that I had lived in Gunnison, which is way up in the mountains in Colorado. There was two little cross streets. And at the same time, she lived in which is now a very fancy ski area. And gosh, the name has skipped my mind.
Butte, and we were about 20 miles apart.
Yeah.
There are sort of synchronicities in our lives where we both grew up in New England. We were both taken. We ended up 20 miles away from each other in Colorado, but didn't know each other. We finally met in Central Florida, which is quite unusual.
Yeah, it is. And we probably saw the same craft over the top of one of the hills between Gunnison and Crested Butte on the same day, in the daytime.
And Denise, you mentioned earlier a couple of times that you had been on a different craft that looked different. Can you tell us about that?
It was huge. It was massive, and it had hallways, and I could see the operating banks, or whatever you want to call it, with entities sitting off to the side, and then there were lines of people waiting for instructions. The ETs on that craft were not very happy. There was some project they were doing, and they did not feel comfortable with it, but had to follow through. There was a huge balcony on that craft that, when you stepped out onto it, it extended away from the craft, and you felt like, or thought, you were going to fall off. The purpose of that was we were handed black boxes, shiny black boxes with no seams. I got very emotional with the handling of that box. We walked down the hall, out onto the balcony, where I recognized someone I know here that had been taken also. And on a signal, that balcony and the craft tipped. And I was looking down, personally, mine, I was looking down on a little A-framed home that was sitting in the pine trees. And when we were signaled, we were to drop the boxes, which we did. And when they reached the halfway point to the ground, they just sparkled and disintegrated.
Do either of you have any idea what the purpose of that was?
I do. And Kathy does too. I was told that the box contained the soul of who was going to find a new home, and they were hybrids, and that they were being delivered to their parents.
Interesting. Very interesting. I wanted to show some drawings and illustrations from the book, and then maybe you guys can tell us a little bit about what we're looking at here. Let me turn my light down or off, and the computer screen can probably illuminate it pretty well. And this is your
Very
Denise,
unusual
your
craft
sketch.
structure.
Oh, yes. Okay.
Yes, and I did check because no one had ever reported that type of craft to me. But I did find one other report, and it was in Colorado, in fact, where that particular shape of craft was reported to the Mutual UFO Network.
It was very intriguing because it was like two inverted dinner plates where the two bottoms were attached. And that was a whole series of lights in the middle, and they were spinning pretty rapidly. And the two plates could fold down, and I don't know how to describe that, but they could. And so they were completely enclosing those lights.
Interesting. Maybe like a bellows or an accordion kind of motion.
Mm-mm. No, it's really, really difficult to describe.
Sure.
Yeah, it's like the outer portions, the plate, could fold and form almost a disc shape, but it enclosed all those lights.
And
I do want to mention that Denise and I have worked with many, many experiencers. We've participated as researchers in 3 studies on experiencers. Denise had said earlier that she was about 3 when she was taken, a little less. 37% of our experiencers, about 5,000, said that they were about less than 5 years old the first time they were taken. The vast majority were under 17, were under 20, I mean, the first time they were taken. The age 17 was about the cutoff, but there were a few above that.
And I'm going to go ahead and move on to the next image here. Guys, I got to get prepared in the chat. This is not for the faint of heart. I still have to make myself a little bigger here so you can see it.
Oh, that's the doctor. That's the mantis. Yeah. And I drew him after I had been under hypnosis so that I could see him clearly.
And then Steve Smith, who is an artist, did that work for me to actually do sort of a forensic sketch of what Denise described.
Mm-hmm.
And there's so much here in the book that mirrors other accounts, and some things that are different, obviously. As I was reading the book, a lot of it sounded familiar, and some things were different. We have another sketch here. I hope we'll be able to pick up. It's a little faint in the book, but let's see if we can pick it up here.
Oh, uh-huh. Now, Kathy's going to have to help with this one, because this is the time when my husband and I were on a dive trip. We were both scuba divers, and we saw something behind the farmer's barn. And I drew what I thought I saw to Kathy, and then my husband drew them. So, do you want to expand on that, Kathy?
I can. Yes, the date was October 19th and 20th, 1991. They were on a dive, cave divers, and they were on a dive trip for the weekend in sort of west Florida, not in the Panhandle, below the Panhandle, so maybe north central. And so they stayed at a motel, and then they left to go on this dive trip. They had not been diving at this point when in this field they saw these things, whatever they were. But they thought that it was very strange that they had not been there before. And now they were there.
Very familiar route to us, because we dove in North Florida a lot. And we were just on our way to dive, so it wasn't nitrogen narcosis or any of that type of thing. Right.
That night, in the middle of the night, for some reason, Denise was led to get up out of bed, to leave the hotel room, and to drive to another area. And when she arrived there was a craft waiting for her. And again, she is taken to craft. And the next morning, let me say that when she arrived back in the hotel room, there was a cut on her head, and it was bleeding. And she has a scar there today, a little bit of a Y shape, I believe. We've worked on 2 other cases, where both with men who had that Y-shaped cut on the top of their head.
And Kathy felt that. I said, I don't know if it's there anymore, and it is, because now I can still feel it.
Yeah, that's a little disturbing. Not quite as disturbing as your account of them removing your eye, but certainly a little disturbing. And we'll get there in a minute. Number 1 from the chat wants to know if the aliens stated or showed you where they were from.
They did, but nothing clearly, because I couldn't understand or had no familiarity with that type of space and place and time. I was not able to draw anything that made any sense to me, so I didn't attempt after that. I am drawn, when I do a sky watch, to Orion's belt, and if I'm going to see anything, it's always there.
Canadian Spider-Man in the chat mentions that he enjoys cave diving, and that Tasmania has some awesome cave diving near Port Arthur. And he goes on to say that nitrogen narcosis doesn't make you hallucinate anyway. It just
Nope.
impairs your judgment like alcohol.
Right. That's right. And it relaxes you in different degrees. I had been working with someone who was also working with Duke University on some of the reactions that people have, how their bodies react to nitrogen and to kind of an overdose or one too many. And some people don't really feel much of anything at all. Others completely lost. There was an individual I used to dive with because he couldn't find his way out. He would get so far, the nitrogen would kind of make him loopy, and he would hold up a sign that said, "Get me out," and I would have him follow me. I did not feel it until afterwards, up to an hour or two, and then I just wanted to eat and go to sleep.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And of course, this wasn't free diving. This is proper scuba diving.
Proper scuba diving, and we did use computers. We dove on a mixture of gas called heliox, and we carried an extra oxygen tank for recompression on the way up.
Interesting. It sounds like you guys really know what you're doing. Have you taught scuba diving?
Yes. I used to teach it. I don't any longer, but I taught it. I would never ever teach cave diving. I just would not want to be responsible because that's an exercise in controlled panic, and I didn't want a class full of that. So,
Interesting.
yeah, I did teach. My husband did also.
Interesting almost how these two experiences are experiments in controlled panic.
Well, in a way, they are. I lost my fear a few years ago. Don't know why. I guess because I was that type of diver and I had to see what was around the next corner. Would I have gone up with William Shatner? Yeah. So I'm a little
Because
bit
of Bill or
adventuresome.
just to go?
Just to go.
Yeah.
Yep.
I noticed, speaking of William Shatner's experience in, I think it's low Earth orbit. I don't think they properly made it into space. But watching video that was online, I think it's on YouTube, he was the only one that wasn't, spinning and doing flips and tricks. He was at the window, looking out the window the entire time.
Yeah, that's a fantastic documentary that he's put together. It's about an hour long. Takes his life back to what he was all about and where he came from, and then resulting in this fantastic flight.
Captain Kirk actually goes to space.
Yeah. And there are so many things that we don't know as far as these crafts were taken to. We don't know what's in our own ocean. And I saw some things there doing night dives that weren't what we would call normal. So, what are we saying? Here we go.
A Canadian Spider-Man says, I didn't feel much at 38 meters down. Not that I could tell. I'd love to do more cave diving. Teaching would be cool, and the dive master training is next on the list. Good for you, Denise, for teaching.
Oh, thank you.
And he also says to Anti-Derivative Jill that Bill is the greatest of all time. I've heard he's kind of a dick in person, actually, but sometimes. I'm going to go ahead and show another illustration here, and we'll see if we can pick it up, and if so, if you can tell us about it.
A little closer. Can you see it, Kathy?
I can see it, and I can tell you what happened there. It was a Sunday morning, and Denise and Ed had all of their diving equipment in the back of their vehicle, They were setting out for the dive before they had to drive home that afternoon. And so they're driving along, going in one direction, and then all of a sudden they find themselves on another road, not the road they took. Ed is stopped again. The vehicle is stopped, and Denise has been taken. And I believe it's a mantis again, because they like to disguise themselves. They're either wearing capes, they're wearing green suits or masks.
Or hoodies.
So, yes, it was what you saw there was this mantis being in a suit, putting Denise, just holding her and lifting her up and putting her back on the seat of the vehicle.
Okay. And here we have Jenny's sketch of the room with fetuses in cylindrical tanks in the examining room. Before I show the image, can you tell us who Jenny is?
Jenny is a case that I had when I lived up in New Hampshire. She and her family lived in Stratham, New Hampshire. She grew up there, and this is the story of multi-generational abduction in that particular family. She and her husband were professional people, and the children were taken as well. In this particular case, Jenny was taken to Kraft, and she was guided by her escort, taken into this room where she was shown fetuses in sort of dome-shaped, huge vats or vials. They were very large. And she described how there appeared to be a fetus inside each one. She thought that some of them, which were actually very, very tiny, looked larger looking through that glass or whatever that was made of. And so one seemed very interested in her. She was told, she didn't know she was pregnant. They told her that she was pregnant. She didn't want to go to Kraft, but they came and they took her. She thought they were going to take her baby. And then they took her to Kraft. They showed her this room, guided her through, took her into another room, put her on a table, and did a procedure on her. And the procedure I suspect that they did was to implant one of the fetuses that was in one of those tubes.
Do I remember the word correctly? Amniocentesis?
Yes.
Is that what you think was going on throughout her life?
An amniocentesis was when a woman is pregnant and they insert a needle beneath her navel. In fact, the newer method puts it into the navel between the folds of the navel. But it is to test the amniotic fluid to detect a problem with the baby if it has Down syndrome, for example.
And I think I remember that your Aunt Betty reported that that's what they said that they were doing to her when she asked, and that at that time there was no such procedure.
That is correct. There was none at that time. Many, many women who have been taken to Kraft, even if they didn't know about Betty, most did though. It was a pretty widespread, widely known case. And most women who are in that program where their ova is taken for this genetic program that their ETs are working on, have this procedure done. I've worked with many.
And a few minutes ago, one or the other of you mentioned studies, and I wanted to ask you about the two studies that I'm aware of that you conducted, and if you could explain them to us.
Yes, absolutely. The first study was just a very small study that Denise and I did together. My background was in sociology and social work, but when I was in college studying sociology, we did statistics, methods of social research. We actually did our own studies in that time frame as a student. So I knew how to do this, and we thought we would do our own small study. We had only 50 experiencers and a 25-person control group. It's always important to have a control group so that you'll have something to measure this against. We were attempting to identify commonalities that experiencers share that aren't common in the general population. And I believe that we were the first people to do that kind of study. And what we discovered a number of amazing things. The most amazing to me is that most of these, the majority had paranormal activity in their homes. They had, many had the ability to heal others or to facilitate the healing process. There's a lot in that book. I know that with every person, with both Jenny and with Denise, I listed their characteristics. So they're all there. We did a much larger study with the Mutual UFO Network. I was the director of the Experiencer Research Team, and we worked with Dr. Don C. Donderi, who is a retired PhD professor of research psychology at McGill University. We talked with Dr. Michael Austin Melton, who is a psychologist, and two other individuals as well, on a major study of 516 individuals. We had far more than that, but we eliminated the hoaxers. We were able to identify them, and those who didn't complete it. We wanted a completed survey. And Dr. Donderi administered the American Personality Inventory, and that was phase 2 of our study. And he was able to use that to identify those who have UFO abduction syndrome. So we wanted to compare the overall experiencers, regardless of what kind, whether it was an abduction, whether it was contact through channeling. We ran sort of the gamut. We wanted to see how their scores compared. And we were particularly interested in those who had abductions, because we were expecting that the experience would be negative, and those who were contactees who had a positive experience. And boy, were we surprised, because we found out that the abductee group had a higher percentage statistically than any other group in having positive, contact that they would want to continue. Overall, the experiencer group of 516 had a 71% stated that they would not want their contacts to end if they could. It was 74% among the abductees. we were really amazed at that. And among the abductee group, they had a much higher percentage of having the symptoms of sleep paralysis, but having been awake when this happened, having a conscious recall of observing a light and non-human entities coming into their environment before they became paralyzed. That was really significant. They had an average of 2 hours missing time. Some less, some more. Some of the participants, like Travis Walton, for example, had several days missing.
5 days.
Yes, Travis 5 days. Some of them had 3 days, some 5 days. So missing time. We found had certain paranormal activities at a very high rate. Those were light orbs that appeared to have intelligence, conscious orbs in their homes that interacted with them. They had the sensation that something unseen was walking on the bed. They felt the movement on the bed as if something was there. They'd feel for it, turn on the light, they couldn't see it, but it was doing this. So from what I know about these entities, they live, some of them that I know of live in the 5th dimension. So they can be with us, but they're just vibrating at a higher frequency. Their atomic structure is just higher than ours. And as a result of that vibration, their molecules are moving very, very quickly. And the way that I can think of to explain this to people is to explain the way you might put an ice cube into a pan. That's us. And then you heat it until it's boiling and it becomes steam. Those are the shadow entities. And sometimes they'll shimmer, or sometimes you'll just see a part, like an outline or a light shadow, but you'll know that they're with you. And then finally, that moisture is still there, but you can no longer see it. And that's what those 5th dimensionals are like. You can know that they're there. You can feel a electrical tingling sensation in your body. You can receive messages from them telepathically. So you know they're there. You just can't see them.
So they are, to borrow the phrase from Dr. David Jacobs, walking among us.
Yes, they are walking among us. We just don't see them. And they, incidentally, if we see them as orbs, they might be seeing us as orbs as well.
What makes you suspect that?
Because Denise has worked with Kevin Briggs as well over a period of several years. We met once a month for 2 years. And Kevin, from the time he was an 8-year-old boy, was taken to craft, and he was taken to craft once, actually, that he remembers, when he was a paper boy and had missing time. But these entities came into his home when he was in the bathtub when he was 8 years old, and then one came back when he was 9 years old as an orb, as a conscious orb, and taught him all about consciousness and about how to astral travel. And one time Kevin was looking at this entity and as an orb, and he asked the entity what he was seeing, what Kevin looked like to him. And Kevin said, an orb. So that's where I received that information from, and Denise did as well.
Yeah.
But also other things that we learned from our study is that 31% of the experiencers who participated have Rh negative blood. That's 15 to 16% in the general population. So it's significantly elevated. But the majority of experiencers still do have Rh positive blood types. We also learned that they undergo a process as they have these experiences where they become more spiritual, where they become psychic or intuitive, where they become empathic. Being empathic or being an empath means that it's a psychic sense so that you can sense what's going on in another person's emotions as if they were your own, or another person's body as if they were your own, that sort of thing. So very, very interesting information we received. We did ask 116 questions, I believe it was, on that study. There is much, much more. We wrote quite a lot about that in the book, Extraterrestrial Contact, What to Do When You've Been Abducted. It's one of the more recent books with a lot more updated information and some of my most interesting cases as well, both positive, negative, and everywhere in between.
The good, the bad, and the ugly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And some of this comes into play when you find a lot of those who have been taken have also had near-death experiences, and they can describe an area that they've been that resembles very much where the ETs are also, and sometimes see their ET in that space during the near-death experience. So that's something else to look into. It just goes on and on. You get one question halfway answered and 10 more come up.
Mhm. The very interesting thing was the information we received from experiencers about messages that they received. We had open-ended questions. Were you given any information by these entities? And there was some very interesting information that correlates with other information that I have in the studies that I have done dating back to an experiment that was done in 1954 between a Navy Admiral Herbert Knowles, and Wilbert Smith from the Canadian government, communication with non-humans. And it's essentially the same. They're very concerned about the human race and our behavior. We are at the point where we could destroy this planet and everything on it. They don't want that to happen. And they're here intervening. They're attempting to upgrade the human race, for one thing. And I think that different ETs different groups might have different assignments that they're completing. The hybridization program is part of this. They told Denise that they were trying to produce a more survivable creature using their DNA and ours. And so they still monitor and take DNA samples. That's what they told her. I'm not certain if they're continuing to do this. We're certainly not receiving as many reports of that happening now. So we're wondering if that part of the program has been completed. They're extraordinarily concerned about our use of nuclear weapons, and that's why they have shut down weapons all over the world at military bases. They've done it in the Soviet Union, what's now Russia. They said that they flew their craft all the way down through Eastern Europe, and then they turned around and flew the craft back up again when they were toying with the US government and the Russian government and making the officials very concerned that a nuclear weapon was going to be launched. It was to draw attention to themselves and what they could do. And this was done a very long time ago. They are very concerned about our failure to take care of our environment. Yeah. They said that at one time we did have an environmental collapse on this planet, and they don't want it to happen again. They generally have a policy of non-interference. They do their work quietly. They do it in the nighttime, and they've tried to make experiencers have amnesia to these events. But, you know, many experiencers remember, most experiencers remember part of it, at least. They remember the beginning. They might remember finding themselves on a table in the craft. They might remember some of that eye-to-eye contact where they're told telepathically, or it's projected, this incredible sense of love toward you, your family. They love you. They're so grateful for what you're doing for them. That sort of thing.
Tommy Hawksblood is a new subscriber, and thank you for subscribing. And he asks, does it matter that they lie a lot?
I don't know if they lie a lot. Some people say they do, but we don't have that evidence in any of our studies. I don't have that evidence in any of the hypnosis sessions that I've done or in any of the investigations. And Denise, have you?
No. I think that they might fear our reaction to some of the things that they know if they told us the whole story. And so it becomes a little bit of a mystery, kind of a Twilight Zone type thing. When I was involved in that breeding program, and I saw something in one of those little vials, a fetus who looked at me, and I felt that that was mine. Exiting that particular ship, I was told, when there is an accident or something goes wrong, then you all, I'm assuming those of us on Earth, get to raise them yourself. Now, I don't have the whole story. I was not given the whole story, but I'm taking what they said as fact. I just wish I knew who these children were at the time, so we could help them out a little bit more. Some of us are a little bit more empathic and sympathize with this factor of abduction.
I do want to say that experiencers, abductees, whatever you want to call yourself, have a choice. They can view themselves as victims, and they can suffer through life, feeling as victims. Now, I have a background in psychiatric social work. It's never good to view yourself as a victim. You have to be a survivor. You have to move beyond this fear, beyond this loathing. And if these entities are telling people they're sending just the most profound feeling of love that you've ever experienced, and it makes that experiencer feel better, I'm not going to say they're lying to you. Don't believe them. That would harm that individual. That would be cruel and unprofessional. So what you have to do is help these individuals, help experiencers to move beyond the fear. Teach them things that they can do themselves. to have a more positive experience. Or if in my book, Extraterrestrial Contact, I even have a chapter on how to raise your vibrational frequency and suggestions on how to end contact if you want it to end.
I actually became quite attached to my gray, my escort, to the point where the last time I saw him was kind of an unusual circumstance, and I can tell you that he has aged. Nobody else would recognize it if they saw a lineup of grays. I could find mine today, and I could see that he has aged, maybe not as quickly as we do, but he has, and I care for him.
Interesting. Are you saying that if there were a lineup of grays that you would be able to pick yours?
Yes.
Yours out of the lineup?
Yes, I could. Mm-hmm.
Interesting. I'm sorry, Kathleen. I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, that's fine. I'm sorry I interrupted. What I wanted to say is that many people have told me that they have observed physical changes of aging in their grays over time. And these are people who are taken who, as children, who are in their 50s, 60s, 70s. These entities do age. They're not biorobotic. They're not all what many people claim they are. You might take a researcher who will claim that, but you take the person who is actually having the contact, they're going to disagree.
Yep.
And hail Heinlein's bootstraps from the UK. I wanted to ask both of you if you were familiar with the work of Dr. David Jacobs, or if you tend to try to stay away from other researchers' work so it doesn't taint consciously or unconsciously your own.
I'm familiar with Dr. Jacobs. I've talked to him many, many times on the phone. We've even had a friendly disagreement sitting face to face because he takes a more negative view of this than I do.
Yeah.
And, with hybrids, he believes that they intend to supplant humans. I just spoke about what I believe is happening. I agree that there is this hybridization program taking place, but I see it as an upgrade, and that humans are involved in this as well. So I don't see it as being that terrible, like he does. And I knew Bud Hopkins. I knew Dr. John Mack as well. So yes, and I think it's important to know my predecessors' findings in their work.
Yeah, I'm the same way. Personally, myself speaking, I feel that I signed up for this. I agreed. I signed some kind of contract. I felt that I needed to do it.
But before you were born?
Yes. Yep.
Yeah.
And so that's what I'm here to do, and to help those who are looking for support, and that's what I'm doing. I have a background in psychology also, but if you know human beings and you've had the experience yourself, then there's a combined sense of well-being between the two of you, or can become that way, and you can actually help them grow from it if they don't have recall of signing up for this. If we want to get into past lives, yes, I think it happened in my last life also.
Very good. I wanted to take a moment to let everybody know that they can go to the URL on your screen https://bit.ly/into-the-fringe to enter to win Kathleen and Denise's book, The Alien Abduction Files, and Antiderivative Jill will be with us soon to spin the wheel. But to get your name on the wheel, you have to go to that URL. And I wanted to ask Denise, as I put the light out here, about Dr. Jacobs' latest book, which is literally called Walking Among Us, in which he discusses that as abductees become retirees, because this is intergenerational and it appears to be lifetime oriented, that his abductees or experiencers, again, however you would like to call it, find themselves after they've retired walking in a Walmart, showing a hybrid or a hybrid, a very human-looking hybrid, but with all of the neurological control that the Greys have, asking questions about how to buy clothes, and that there tend to be 3 of them to an apartment, and they will buy furniture or they will acquire furniture, and they'll just put it all in one room, and then the abductee or the experiencer will show up and they'll ask questions like, where does the furniture go? Who gets to watch TV? How long do they get to watch TV for? Really, almost infantile questions that anybody that grew up on the earth would know. And I was curious if anything like that had happened with your case, Denise, and in general, Kathleen, with your ongoing cases. So Denise, please feel free to go first.
Well, there's a little gal that found me when she was a junior in high school. She's now 25. She's written to me for years now. She sent me pictures. She was very leery about doing that to begin with, because you can see a difference in the shape and length of her fingers, and there are some things that are very different about her. And she is not with a family who understands who she is and why she is. And so from a distance, I've supported her and answered the same types of questions. She recently had moved and moved with her family. She had her bedroom all completely filled with boxes and didn't know where to put a single one of them. So that's an example of that type of thing. Also, there is a woman that shows up at my Sam's Club, and I have been asked some very strange questions by her, and she looks nothing like us. When I first saw her, I wondered how she was managing out in public. And she had a gentleman with her. When she'd asked me too many questions, he said, "Come on, we're getting in the car." And she was kind of pulling away to come and continue the questioning. I've seen her 3 or 4 times. So I think it does happen.
And Kathy?
I know an individual who is a mantis, either hybrid or walk-in. I'm not certain. She was born to an American family. She grew up in this family. She's high functioning. She is no different than any other human, but she absolutely loves these mantis types who take her to craft from time to time. It's almost like having a family reunion. she loves them so much.
And in your studies and other case research, do you find that these sort of cases, as outlined in Dr. Jacobs' latest book, that as people sort of age out into retirement, that they're experiencing the sort of situations and circumstances that I mentioned from the book?
What I'm finding is that as experiencers age, when they become ill, if they have a physiological problem, they can ask for healing. And oftentimes these entities will heal them. They are giving information to humans now as they age, and they become less fearful than they were when they were young and undergoing these procedures. In fact, they no longer actually have to be taken to craft all the time. Some of this is just out of body, or these entities, as I spoke of earlier, come into their environment. They can feel them, they can talk to them telepathically, but they can't see them.
Anything that you wanted to add to that, Denise?
I would agree with her completely. And I have been healed in some unusual way at age 20. And I had someone draw pictures, forensic drawings of the nurse and then the ET that checked on me years later at my door. I don't know if it's in there. I don't remember. But this is such an exciting life that we've been given. And I think that to ignore what's going on is wrong, because there's so much more for us spiritually, physically, any way you could possibly think of that we can learn from these entities.
So you would say overall, both of you, that your experiences have been positive?
I would, yes.
I would say that mine have been positive and negative and everything in between. And I think that fear is what determines anybody's attitude toward what is occurring. If you are terrified, as people are generally at the beginning of this type of experience, you're in sheer terror. When you're young, you can't sleep during the night, and when you're a teenager, and when you're in your 20s and you're being visited and these procedures are being done on you, you're terrified. You feel like you're being exploited. You can't sleep at night. You walk with trepidation if you have to get up during the night. It's not good. People sleep with their lights on, with their television sets on. Just some people have to sleep with other people just to get through the night.
And so turns some people into alcoholics.
Some people will drink themselves to sleep. Unfortunately, that's a terrible thing. And I've been trying to get those messages out to these non-humans, the human response. And if they want us to have a different perception of what they are doing, then they have to change their behavior, their attitude, and they have to have more respect and consideration overall. They cannot continue the way they began so many years ago, 70 at least years ago, and continue to do these things with earthlings.
All true. I don't know if I just don't pay attention, but since I was a little girl, I had to sleep with the lights on. Now I have the TV on and earphones like this so I don't disturb my husband, so that I can watch programs until I fall asleep. But is it real fear anymore? It used to be. Um, Now I don't know what to call it for sure. But I wouldn't change it.
And on to derivative Jill. I don't know why I always say her name in a Boris Karloff voice. Has mentioned my merch store. So I will briefly share my screen so that everyone can have a look at that. And there's plenty of Into the Fringe merchandise available. And we have both women's and men's t-shirts. We even have mugs available. And everything in the store, whether it's a t-shirt or a coffee mug or a tumbler, has the URL of my channel on the back. So as a thank you for being a walking billboard for my channel, I keep the prices just pennies above cost. So please do have a look. And it's easy to find. It's just gillstore.com. So that makes it easy. So at this point, I'd like to go ahead and ask Jill or one of the other mods to come on in. The invitation link is in the Twitter group, and then we'll be able to get all the people on the wheel for the giveaway. And we have about 8 minutes left, so we should be able to do that. And excuse me, while we're doing that, I wanted to ask both of you if there's anything that I have not asked or that we haven't discussed that you would like to mention, and certainly to please plug your own websites and so forth, books, so that everyone can find out more about you online and buy your work.
Kathy?
Well, the one thing that I did not mention that I want people to know is that Denise is an intergenerational experiencer too. When she lived in Connecticut as a child, her mother and father were preparing for bed one night, and they saw a large light coming toward their bedroom window. They wondered if it was a plane on a collision course with their house. The next thing they knew, they were waking up in the morning. So her mother is an experiencer, was an experiencer as well. Now, my website is kathleen-marden.com. I'm going to be posting the places where I will be giving presentations. This year, the conferences, there are articles you can read. My autographed copies of all of my books are on sale there through PayPal. For people who live inside the United States. Outside the United States, the postage is just too high. You're better off buying it in your own country. So lots of interesting things to read there, and I'm going to turn it over to Denise.
Yeah. I had taken down my website, so how to reach me, dmstoner1@gmail.com. And I always respond to my mails, so feel free if you have questions or interested in asking about yourself. That's how to reach me.
Very good. before we do the giveaway, I just want to thank you both for being part of our first abduction roundtable. We're going to have another abduction roundtable next week. That's going to be with Peter Robbins, experiencers Terry Lovelace, and Deborah Jordan Cobble, who is Kathy Davis from Bud Hopkins' book Intruders. So that will be very interesting. And I believe we have Canadian Spider-Man with us.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi.
How
Can you
are
hear
you?
me all right, Cardinal Sin?
I can. How are you?
I'm good. Yes, Kathleen Marden and Denise Stoner, thank you so much. And we have a petition in the chat going on after to keep you on after the giveaway because we love listening to you.
Well, we may have to
my
just
goodness.
ask them back because
Thank you so much. You're very generous with your time, and you don't hold back when you tell stories, do you, ladies?
No, we
No,
don't.
no.
Canadian Spider-Man, can we get a little bit more light on you?
Yes, sir. Yeah, I was wondering about that. Yeah, we can do that.
Cool.
That's why I put that little hanger there.
And do
And
you have
I'd
the-
love to go diving with you. That would be
Yeah.
great. Are there diving instructor teaching lessons at a discount for Cardinal Sin channel members and wrenches?
Boy, well, now.
No, I'll tell you stories about diving in Tasmania if you haven't been.
I think
Have
we're
not
getting a
been.
little tangential.
Have not been
Just
to
slightly.
Tasmania.
Sorry, Cardinal.
Mexico and some of the others.
Canadian Spider-Man, do you have the wheel ready?
I do, courtesy of Anti-Derivative Jill. I cannot take credit for this wheel, but yes, I do, and I will share my screen with you if you're ready.
Yes, I'm ready. And do we have everyone on that wants to be on?
Jill has given me the updated wheel. Yes.
Great.
Yes. Okay, there we go. And I'm sharing now, sharing system audio.
The anticipation is killing me. Maybe that's
Okay.
there we go. Okay.
Is that working?
That looks pretty good.
All right.
So give her a spin.
All right. 1, 2, 3, spin. Congratulations. Double back to
Yvonne
back.
Ivanovich, who, if there were any kind of way to cheat at random wheel spinning, he would be guilty of it. He has won a great deal of prizes, and everybody in the chat has the same chance of winning. It's just Yvonne seems to have a knack for it. So congratulations
Yep.
to Yvonne and Kathleen. I will get his information to you so that you can send out the book. And Tracy from the chat says, thanks for the great evening, Denise, Kathleen, and Cardinal Sin. Fascinating.
Good.
We
Glad to enjoy.
certainly do thank you for coming on tonight and very much look forward to your next appearance, God willing, on Into the Fringe. And that will probably do it for now, unless any of you have a final word.
I thank you for having me. You're an excellent host.
Oh,
Made
thank
it
you.
easy for me. And so thank you for having me.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be with you again. And I
The
think that
pleasure's all
Yvonne,
mine.
won the book the last time I
I
was
think
on.
you're right. And Darius Munchausen says, I've won 3 times myself. And he's a moderator, but being a moderator doesn't give you any more or less of a chance of winning.
Yeah.
So do try to be with us next week, same time, same channel, for our second abduction roundtable. And until then, it's Cardinal Sin out.